Hello. It's my first presentation on the East Coast. First of many, I hope. Okay. Ascension Karma. The coming age of harmony, or so we hope. So who are the Anshar? The Anshar are a fourth density version of us. They claim to come from our future, our optimal temporal reality timeline. They noticed with their fourth density, a very high consciousness beings, and their technology is amazing. At some point in their future, and hopefully our future, they noticed something similar to the Mandela effect. And they used their technology to track it back. And they realized that their timeline was disappearing on them, that things were starting to change at a drastic rate. So what they did is they sent a very small group back in time, about 17 million years. And their job was to steward or maintain their timeline, to make sure that that timeline was not interrupted or changed in any way. So that small handful of Anshar that were sent back 17 million years, over that 17 million years, they became a huge, thriving civilization of their own. Multiple cities, underground, and they stayed quietly, influencing us as they could, both mentally and appearing to us at different points in time to give us information that would help us grow in consciousness and steward that timeline. So where do the Anshar live? How many people here watch Cosmic Disclosure? So pretty close to everybody. Okay. Well, I was brought down to their, I guess, it was more of a holy type of, I don't know. It was kind of like a place where the holy people go to be set aside. So it's kind of like a sanctified area. And when they walked me out into their city area, I saw huge domed buildings. I saw up in the pillars of the rock, there were lights and balconies built in. They had built buildings into the actual pillars. How do they live differently than us? The Anshar are, of course, a fourth density group. They think completely differently than us. A lot of times people ask, how come the Anshar do this? How come they do that? And it's because they have a completely different level of consciousness. They do not view anything the same way that we do. And of course, they're fourth density, and we're considered third, fourth transitional. We're in the process, as is our planet, of transitioning fully into fourth density. Now, all of us have our own belief systems, ideas that we've put together over years about what are the different densities. And what has been explained to me is that a change in density begins with an expansion in consciousness. That these density or these vibrations are a vibration of consciousness. So as our consciousness expands and we have more power or more understanding of how to use our co-creative consciousness, then physically, the physical part starts to catch up with the consciousness. David and I have had many conversations. For a while, he expected there to be some sort of a solar flash, and then we start floating around and using telekinesis. And how it was explained to me is that is not how it happens. That we get an expansion of our consciousness, and then we begin to look around and say, are things different or am I different? What occurs is our consciousness expands, and we we view everything in a completely different way, and we approach things in that manner. And as we begin to learn how to manipulate and control that consciousness, that co-creative consciousness, then we begin to figure out, everything is vibration, this chair, the wall behind me. And once we learn to manipulate that vibration with consciousness, we begin to have abilities to affect the physical world. Things like telekinesis and all of those things begin to build. It's just not going to be a sudden change. We're not going to go from, arguing with each other to all of a sudden, like I said before, floating around and using telekinesis. So Kari, or Aree, for quite a while, I was just calling her Aree. She explained to me that her and her family, and her sister was there with her when I first met them. And they come from the house of Ka, and her name is Aree. So when I speak to her, it's Aree. It's not Kari. And I did that because a lot of people were feeling like they were getting communication from Kari because everyone focused on her. And we needed to know, who was fantasizing and who was really having communication. And people are receiving communications from the Anshar, but it's not all Aree. There are many hundreds of them that reach out to us and our higher selves on a continuous basis. When I interfaced with Kari, the information that was shared between us, I learned that she was over 130 years old, which is very young for her people. They live to be 800, 900 years old, and they have ways to, if they don't want to transition, they can preserve in that life and stay alive in this density even longer. And I think it's been about a year ago when I first had that meeting. And what occurred is I really didn't have a whole lot of warning. There was a bright flash, and I'm in a cavern area. And it was a temple area, a domed room, and I was in the middle of it. And her sister, and a couple other of the Anshar walked up and introduced themselves to me. And they wanted me to observe a meeting between with the Inner Earth Council. And and I guess many of you remember the very embarrassing cleansing process they made me go through beforehand. That was back when I was about 65 pounds heavier and was very self-conscious about it. And I was instructed to remove all of my clothing in front of all of these people and get into a fountain and go through this cleansing ceremony where you washed different parts of your body in order. And it was a very uncomfortable experience for me. I was very uncomfortable. The mind meld, it was not just a simple interface like I've had with many different beings. Usually when there's an interface, it's just a bidirectional kind of communication. With this mind meld, we were both pulled out of our bodies to in between where we were sitting. My consciousness, my awareness was pulled out, and it blended with hers. And after that moment, I was never the same. It changed me in a major way. I went from, she talked to me about the diet, and very soon after that, I was refusing to switch over to a high vibratory diet. And so apparently they arranged for me to get food poisoning from eating meat. And I got deathly ill. I got very ill, and immediately switched over to being vegan for just, cold turkey, switched over. And that was a rough transition for me as well, because I was not being a proper vegan. And I ended up getting malnutrition. It was very rough, but it was a process that was pretty much instigated by the Anshar. The experience also forced me to look at different issues I had from a whole new perspective. I was seeing it from her perspective. And she counseled me on all the things that she saw that I needed to work on to be able to continue this mission or to be successful. And she has continued doing that to this day. So what role does Aree play as a priestess in the Anshar society? The priest caste, they pretty much are the ones who interact with us on the surface. The rest of their population has, in the beginning, the whole population was focused on maintaining that timeline. But the masses of their people who were not designated to work on that, like the priestess and priest caste, they were just working on their own growth and spiritual vibration. The people I saw in the city had a completely different, I would say energy, but attitude. They were focused on raising their vibration and not so much focusing on the surface like the priest caste was. One of the main things that Aree communicated to me in the beginning that I reported was the imbalance of the masculine and feminine in our society. She stated that before we've had two catastrophes that are in our recent history over the last 50,000 years. And after the second cataclysm, the masculine and feminine, they found a way to come back into balance. The reptilian groups, the Aryan groups, did not want that balance. So they began to create different types of religions, different types of social norms that would disrupt that. So that, in turn, threw the planet out of balance. In order for us to attain that optimal temporal reality, not only do we have to find that balance, but we need to find the spiritual balance as well. And that all goes back to the Blue Avian message. They're trying to communicate the same thing to us, the Anshar are. And it all has to go back to karma and forgiving ourselves. As I've stated before, all of the traumas that you've had, they have mass. And they become anchors for you that cause resistance for these energies that are coming in, these cosmic energies. So the more that we focus inwardly on forgiving ourselves, forgiving others, and balancing our karma, the fewer side effects we have from these energies coming in. I've mentioned that the good are getting better, the bad are getting worse, and the crazy are getting crazier. And it's all because of these energies and their side effects. So I kind of talked about this. Balancing the masculine and the feminine, I guess we have a lot of preconceived ideas of what masculine is and feminine is. You watch TV, you see the commercials that come on, the sports, and there's such a broad difference between the feminine and masculine energies. And that's why we have the problems of war. Before the last cataclysm, when they had balance, before the reptilians and the Orions stepped in, they were a matriarchal society. The elders were almost all women. The leaders were almost all women. There was a lot of peace, as you can imagine, during that time. Well, the Aryan group did not want that balance or peace here, so they had to disrupt it. And some of these genetic farmer groups were not pleased because these 22 different genetic programs are also spiritual programs. And as we raise consciousness and become more spiritual, it has a direct effect on our DNA. And that balance needs to be maintained, that masculine and feminine, for the DNA to keep progressing to a point to be a good antenna for us to pull in these energies and transform with them if we are not able to readjust or get the masculine and feminine back in balance, we will not, or at least a good portion of us are able to do that, then we're not going to reach that optimal temporal reality. So how do I meet with Aree now? Typically, now, mainly, she contacts me through what David called the construct. And I think he stole that from the Matrix. But it's very similar. It is a zone that we co-create together. They create a space for us to meet in, a different vibratory place that we meet mentally, and it's not a physical meeting. When you first arrive, it's all white. It's just like on the Matrix. And then as we begin to interface with each other, then what we think about begins to manifest within that environment. So we kind of co-create. We'll have a conversation, and kind of like a presentation right here, we will have holographic or 3D objects or concepts appearing. So it is not just a verbal or mental communication. There's also different colors that will relate to emotions. She'll show me something in the construct in a three-dimensional sort of holographic way, but at the same time, there'll be colors flashing behind her, and they coincide with different emotions and thoughts that she's having. So telepathic, you can send a lot of information back and forth telepathically, but when they use these other, I guess, symbols in that state, the amount of information that is sent back and forth increases exponentially. And at times, she still does pull me down in the physical, but that has become more and more rare. I reported recently on Cosmic Disclosure that they pulled me down, and they were in the middle of pretty much an evacuation. They were preparing for these energies to come in, and the reason that they were evacuating is that their vibratory level of consciousness has developed past fourth density. They're a transitional species themselves. And each time one of these cycles occurs, their entire population will evacuate to basically a temporal bubble. And it's very similar to the temporal bubble that I've explained outside of Jupiter and Saturn. Those of you who remember, the Super Federation Council would meet inside this spatial anomaly, temporal anomaly, and we would fly into it, and we'd have to punch in and punch out in the exact same trajectory. When we would go in, there would be no stars, and no matter where you were, what galaxy you were in, you could enter that temporal reality from your galaxy or your star system. When you punch in, you're leaving, let's say you're in the Andromeda galaxy, you enter the temporal reality, and then you're in this null zone. It's really nowhere. And you have to leave by punching out in the same way, and you end up back in your galaxy, or where you entered from. So people from multiple galaxies can meet very easily. So how does Aree assist me in my life? She gives me a lot of counseling. But basically what she does is guide me through figuring out my own problems and my own solutions. Like when I had some significant issues with my marriage and my relationship with my father, and she was trying to encourage me to clear that karma. And when I would come to her and ask her about marital things, well, they're fourth density. Marriage is a third density concept. And she shared with me quite a bit about how they live. Because of the way we perceive things, there's a lot I haven't shared because we perceive it wrong. Or we would try to emulate them before we're ready. They do not have marriage. They have family groups. And these family groups, they help raise each other's children. They are Intimacy is seen as an energetic exchange. It's not seen the way we see it with morality and all these different ways. So we, most likely, if I shared everything, we would mirror our society and way of thinking on top of them, and we would, label them as being immoral or just someone that we shouldn't listen to because their beliefs and way of living is so much different than ours. Now, the Anshar are assisting people on the surface more than they ever have in the past. One of the things that's made a lot of people very uncomfortable is there was deception involved. They would meet with people and tell them, I'm from the Pleiades or from this place, when they were actually from a different timeline and were living below our feet. They did this not to deceive us, not just to be deceitful, but they did it for operational security. At that point, we had developed technologies that were becoming a danger to them and their society. We were developing deep earth-penetrating weaponry that we were using to fight against the Orion group. Well, after a while, we stopped differentiating and started attacking all the different bases. But we referred to them as embassies. What the Anshar have been doing, they sit in these chairs that float off the ground that look like an egg split. The technology they have down there it's all consciousness-based. Every piece of technology is powered by the collective consciousness of the Anshar. They're pulling energy from the collective consciousness to power all of these different, I guess we would call them devices, except there's really no technology to them. It's really hard to describe. And when some of our scientists first started getting some of their ships, which they provided in trade, not because they needed anything from us, but they were trying to help us grow technologically along with the spiritual growth. Our scientists said these are shells. There's nothing to them. There would be some windings of stuff that looked like fiber optics, but there was no propulsion. There was no power plant. There was nothing that looked like a guidance system. Well, what they eventually learned was that the pilot was not only the power system, but they were also the guidance system. Everything happened through the pilot. Without the pilot, it was just pretty much a fuselage. It was useless to us. Some of our more psychically developed people in the program started learning how to activate certain parts of the ships, but they were unable to fly them around and control them. Now, recently, we had Eclipse of Disclosure conference at Mount Shasta. I was told leading up to that situation, or to that event, that we have to start doing mass meditations and focusing on having a optimal temporal reality. That if we could get at least 200,000 people together and focusing on the same thing, that we would be able to pivot closer towards this optimal temporal reality, which they were very concerned. We were heading in the wrong direction. They were starting to have more and more Mandela effect occurrences. So she stated that if we could get at least 200,000 people focusing all on the same temporal reality and outcome, that pivot would occur and it would be beneficial for us. And apparently that occurred. We did it. We were able to pivot away from a temporal reality that was going to be very negative. It was going to involve open rule by the Orion group, that we would be greatly reduced in population and live openly as slaves. That's where we were headed, because we were allowing all of the Orion group and these secret societies that run the planet to manipulate our co-creative consciousness. It was amazing that it took a fraction of 1% to pivot back. Just imagine if we can wake up more and more people and have them focus on being service to others and focused on having an optimal temporal reality to where the Orion group just can't exist. They cannot exist in that vibration. The eclipse was a very big turning pivot point for humanity. Now, the Anshar, things have been going, I guess, so poorly for their timeline that they had decided that they were going to break away from these, what are referred to as the Mohammed Accords. And it has nothing to do with Mohammed or the Muslim religion. It just so happened that this treaty was ratified right after the time when Mohammed was here. And what the treaty stated was that the Orion group, these Nordic groups, the Inner Earth groups, other non-terrestrial groups, they agreed not to have open contact with humanity, to allow us to develop on our own, that they would only interact and manipulate the societies from like secret societies or through kings and that kind of a thing, that they weren't going to openly appear, and most important, they weren't going to have battles anymore. They were having the people, human beings on the planet that were trying to develop, that they were wanting to develop in a certain way. They were trying to guide these people through belief systems and religions. And when they would see these craft in the skies doing battle with each other, it affected the consciousness in a way that was very negative, and people began to develop religions about the gods and battles of the gods, and it started pulling everybody off of this path that is spiritual and genetic in nature. Now, the Anshar, it is their mandate to assist us into reaching the optimal temporal reality. They're going to help us get right up to the precipice of this transition, and then we're going to be on our own, not completely. We have Mika's people, a few other people that are in our local star cluster that have recently, relatively recently, gone through what we're about to go through. They got rid of the Orion group. There's no more AI infestation in their solar systems anymore. And they all went through with this solar flash. And when the solar flash occurred, the consciousness expansion occurred in all of the people. And they went through what I've referred to as a consciousness renaissance. David and I have had some interesting conversations because, we all have our own UFO belief systems. We just do. We have no choice. We have to, try to figure things out based on our experiences, and we develop these belief systems. He was under the impression that these fourth density beings like the Anshar would not allow cataclysms to happen because they would not authorize it. And I told him how it was explained to me when I was asking about why certain cataclysms would be allowed to happen, deaths, that type of thing. How it was explained to me is that the Earth is going through a transition to fourth density, and it's almost complete. And we're riding on the surface of the Earth like fleas on a dog. And the Earth is not trying to shake off the fleas. It's not trying to, I've heard speculations that, the Earth is trying to cleanse itself. What's occurring is it's going through this transitional change. And it's an energetic and physical change. And, what I stated to David is, he was like, how is that authorized? How is that authorized? And I said, which being has the power to approach Gaia and say, slow down. You can't go through your transition because it's negatively affecting the fleas, So, they're not going to interfere with the transition of Gaia. And all they're going to do is try to assist that transition and try to wake us up so we can assist that transition, as well as survive, save the fleas. So how are the Anshar preparing for this density shift? I've pretty much already explained that they are evacuating all of their cities into a temporal bubble, very similar to the one that the Super Federation meets in. And they've done this every 20, 25,000 years when the cycles occur. I was brought into this temporal reality, or this temporal bubble, and it was pretty weird. When we entered in, I could see it's like a sphere, 300, I was like in the middle of a sphere, and all around me in 360 degrees, full circumference, were the buildings from the different cities. And they were all around the outside of the sphere with the, I guess, the tops of the buildings pointing towards the center. And we were brought to the center. We were flown in. And what they do is they go into these temporal bubbles and ride out the storm, this energetic storm that occurs. And then afterwards, they've come out in the past, and then they assist the surface population. What was explained to me is that if they did not move themselves into this temporal bubble, that this energetic change or this transition would affect them negatively. It could even pull them backwards in their process. It could, the energies were quite a bit differently than the ones they had already obtained. So is this imminent? Strangely enough, the energetic changes are a catalyst for this, this transition. But what most of us haven't realized is that our co-creative consciousness is directing when this will occur. We're all deciding together if we will go through this process. Oh, there's no if, but when we're going to be ready. And that's one of the reasons that the blue Avians came, as well as the spheres that were like resonance devices all throughout our solar system. These different sized spheres, blue spheres, were spaced out, and these energies that were coming across them were buffered from us, so it wouldn't be too much for us to handle. We would have had much more end-time madness than we're having right now if they hadn't done that. People would have, I mean, it just would have been chaos in the streets already. But is it imminent? That, it's soon, but how imminent it is depends on us. We're co-creating everything together. These different beings that are in our solar system, they're co-creating this reality with us. Some of them have negative intent. They're trying to create a negative temporal reality. But we're all working in concert together. And the balance towards the divine feminine and service to others is really the only way that we can fight back against the negative. Any time that we try to, fight in a conventional way, use, violence, it sets us further back. Even if we have victories against the Orion group, every victory we have sets us back, spiritually and energetically. We're approaching the problem in the wrong way. When you're a hammer, every problem has to be a nail. And we're approaching every problem, with that type of mentality, or the majority of the planet is. So what kind of earth changes can we expect during this transition? Well, this gets a little scary. There are some disturbing things that are going to occur. There are going to be, extremely large earthquakes, tsunamis. I was told to really keep your eye. The canary in the coal mine are the volcanoes. Aree told me that when you start seeing these multiple volcanoes starting to erupt, then you know that it's getting very close to this crustal displacement that occurs and the solar flash. And it all occurs at pretty much the same time. I guess many people how many people watch Suspicious Observer? Yeah. Because they follow the electric universe concept, they've been able to understand how these magnetic connections between the sun and the earth work. And they've been able to start to predict earthquakes. So they're beginning to see the transition. I mean the relationship between the sun and the Earth's weather, the volcanism, and the more that we're starting to adopt the electric universe model, the more we're going to be able to understand how the cosmic web works. Very recently, they announced the cosmic web and how it works in mainstream media. I mean, how many people have seen that announcement? They announced that, oh, we discovered that there is no dark matter. You know, it's not dark matter. What's occurring and what explains the anomalies that they're seeing is that everything in space and time is connected. Every galaxy has an electromagnetic filament connecting them. And then Hubble looked at, they were able to see what the universe looked, like 4 billion years ago. And with the imagery they pulled up, it looked like a big cobweb with all of the galaxies having kind of a light filament in between them. And what they began to realize is that these electromagnetic filaments were also bidirectional pathways. That is how the cosmic web is how the portal systems work. Each galaxy is connected through these filaments. Each star is connected through these electromagnetic filaments. Within each star, you have planets or any type of matter within that solar system. As it rotates around the star, there is an electromagnetic filament connection. Each planet or each planetoid has a grid system on it. And that grid, as the Earth spins, these electromagnetic filaments are connecting to the Earth, but as the Earth spins, it's connecting to different areas. It takes the path of least resistance, just like electricity. So all of these various, spots where you find a lot of, they call them nodes. I'm trying to remember what, the ley lines. The ley lines are this grid, and they call them nodes, just like you do with electricity. As they spin, the connections are made to these nodes, and they're in sacred places. And these portals can open up underground, on the surface, and in our atmosphere, our outer atmosphere. And they finally were given a hyperdimensional mathematics to be able to calculate when these portals would open and where. And that information, when it was shared with a lot of the indigenous groups that have been around for a while, they incorporated it into the star, where they follow star charts and the calendars. It had to do with tracking the various cataclysmic cycles, as well as being able to predict when and where these portals were going to open. Now, okay, we've heard the solar sneeze, a lot of us have. Is this solar event, is it related to the transition of densities? Absolutely. The cosmic web in these electromagnetic filaments, as a star is traveling through these energetic, basically gases, it causes something similar to friction within their magnetic field. And the energies begin to feed in through the north and south poles of each star. And the energy enters the star and then leaves through the surface of the star to feed back into the rest of the solar system. So as we are moving more and more through this energetic area of our galaxy, more and more of these energies are feeding in through the sun and being pushed out to the different planets. Those energies are changing the vibration. So yes, it has a direct effect on these densities, and it's a part of the process that every star system goes through. So we've discussed humanity is being affected by these energies. I mean, we all see it. I mean, how many people have noticed how crazy things are getting? I mean, literally, like what I said earlier, the good people are starting to focus inwardly. They're getting, these energies are flowing through them in a non-disruptive way or a less disruptive way, and they're becoming more blissed out. We're seeing a lot of people in our community that, when they work on their karma, they work on their traumas and release those anchors, the energies pass through them and are not having resistance from these different areas of trauma that we hold on to. So people that have been doing the inner work are starting to bliss out. Those who have not, all of these different, basically nodes that they have in their bodies from, the different traumas. There are people probably in this room that allow people who have abused them and treated them horribly to control their lives. And some of us in this room may be under the control of someone who died 30, 40 years ago because we haven't forgiven them, we haven't forgiven ourselves, we haven't dealt with that trauma, and it's a part of our way of life, and we don't know how to let go of it. Those of us who are focusing and doing the hard work are releasing that energy, and these different energies are able to pass through us a lot easier. And I've described how the spheres have helped. How many of you noticed that you have different traumas or different things that you've buried that you do not want to look at, and you find that they're being thrown in your face constantly now? You're not being allowed to escape from them. You're not being allowed to hide from them. Everyone is being forced to deal with their karma. And those of us who know what's going on are starting to deal with it. Other people, they're just starting to stick their heads in the sand because they do not want to look at the aspects of themselves. Most of us can get to a point to where we feel it's very service to others to forgive people. But forgiving ourselves is the most difficult part. And those are the things that we let go of last, especially in my case, I know for sure. So basically, facing our traumas and our karma is the only way for us to transition. We've got to heal the wounds. We've got to, go through the pain, and cry and scream and just go through the process. If we don't go through the process, then these energies are just going to keep us down. So, who is excited about disclosure? Okay. Be careful what you ask for. Every single one of us here, including myself, when we get a full disclosure, we're going to be, it's going to be like a punch in the gut. All of our little belief systems are going to be destroyed before our eyes. But what we need to understand, this disclosure that we're asking for, which is extremely important for us to be able to move on as a species. I mean, like example, we haven't dealt with a lot of the racism and the atrocities that have occurred on the planet. We have all this racial divide and divide between religions. We can't even deal with that very well. Republicans and Democrats, they're at each other's throats, and it's all a big manipulation. I mean, if you're caught up in all that crap, sorry. Get away from it. Turn off the TV. Get away from it. I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat. That's all a sideshow. It's a distraction. It's distracting you from doing the inner work and focusing on what you should. What's going to occur is if we get full disclosure, it is not going to be a kumbaya moment. We're all, we're not going to be hopping up and down and celebrating. We're going to be sitting there next to everyone else with our jaws on our chest. Because all of the full disclosures, that's going to include all of the pedophilia stuff. It's going to include all of the galactic slave trade stuff that has occurred. Very, very upsetting things. We're going to, like David said, people like us, we will be able to deal with it better than those who are totally asleep. But if we get disclosure, we're going to basically have to go and counsel our families. We're going to have to make them get out of bed, make them take a shower, make them eat. Everyone's just, they're going to be so traumatized. It's going to be, full disclosure is going to be the most traumatizing thing that ever happened to the surface population.
Let's do it!
Yeah. So, yeah, we're going to be ripping off the Band-Aid, basically. And then we're going to go through a period of dealing with all of these horrible things that have occurred. And all of this is going to be made easier by this energetic change, this solar flash, because it's going to expand our consciousness and make us connected on a level that we've never been before. And I mean, there's a few whistleblowers that are starting to come forward, and they're like, I want to tell everything. And I'm like, be careful. Don't incriminate yourself. There's a lot I haven't told that I was forced to take part in that I have problems forgiving myself for, but a lot of us were forced to do things that were terrible. And what I've explained to these people is that if all of these elite people go and try to hide underground and the population receives this information, they are going to look for the nearest thing to the elite to hang from every light pole. So if we give certain information and all of the people that were responsible for these acts are in hiding, they're going to go for the next best thing. And it's not going to be pretty. I mean, disclosure is going to be very rough. So I'm asked, what's going to happen first? Are we going to get disclosure and then there'll be an ascension? Is there going to be some sort of a solar flash and then our consciousness expands and after that occurs, we're connected in a way that lies are impossible? My answer is, I don't know. We're going to co-create that reality together. It's up to each of you how this is going to unfold. That's why more and more of us, we're trying to come together. I mean, many of y'all know recently that they tried to cause a civil war within the esoteric and UFO communities. They want us at each other's throats, arguing about our different UFO religions, instead of coming together under a flag of demanding disclosure. If we're going to wait for our government to walk up to a podium, or the Pope, or anyone else, and say, okay, there are aliens, well, we're going to wait forever. We have to force the situation. We have to become very active. We have to come together, organize, and begin to do demonstrations. A million-man march for disclosure would be great. That is how we have to get seed the rest of the mass consciousness with this information. That's why we're trying different initiatives like, different books, movie type things. We're trying to turn the tools that the cabal uses against them. Whenever you go to a movie and you sit in a theater, you go into an alpha state, a meditative state, and which makes you ripe for programming. And then they program you with the movie. Now that's in not only your consciousness, but the 100th monkey effect. It's in the consciousness of all of humanity. Then they need to create a highly emotional event. Our emotions are what catalyze the co-creation that's going on. So if they put out a movie about, let's say, an earthquake that's going to destroy all of California, that's in our consciousness. Then they need to find a way to cause us to make it happen through our co-creative consciousness. They manipulate us. They'll feed us information that it's imminent. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. Millions of people are going to die. Well, guess what? We cause it to happen. We are the source of their magic. They have been manipulating us to use our co-creative consciousness abilities against ourselves, to enslave ourselves. So people, often will be like, we're the victims. How come? And they're very angry. They're like, how come, we don't get contact, or we're just as much to blame as the powers that be. We have gone to a state of apathy, manipulated to go into a state of apathy. But until we begin to stand up and use our own power of co-creative consciousness in the correct way, then we're always going to be slaves. So usually when I tell a person everybody's UFO belief system or perspectives are going to be destroyed, people sit back, they're like, I can see that. Yours, and yours. I'm right. I know what's going on. I've studied this stuff for 40-something years, 50-something years, 60-something years. I know what's up. Well, guess what? They are all belief systems. You basically have all heard me describe, we're all just a bunch of idiots that are trying to figure things out. Each experience, each bit of knowledge we get, see it as a bit of a grain of sand. And we pick up each one. Okay, this experience taught me this, and we put it in a little dish. And we continually are adding to that dish, and then we grind that dish, or what's in that dish, into a lens. And that lens is our perspective, how we see things. Distortions and all. This is where distortions come in, because we'll have something will happen to us, and we'll take that and we'll add it to our lens and crush it in, and that lens is not perfect. Light bends as it's going through it instead of passing straight through. And that's all we have. Our experiences, our accumulated knowledge, that lens, and information coming in, see it as light, the information that's coming in. We hold that lens up, and that's what we use to interpret the data or the light coming through. And each of us have a distorted lens. Many of us have learned through time to not get locked into our belief systems. We constantly are, I used to believe quite a bit differently than I do now. My experiences have caused my belief system to expand. Those of us who know that we need to keep adding grains and keep grinding that lens are doing a lot better than those who have this very thin lens that they finished building by the time they were 30, 40 years old. What is going to happen is that all of our lenses are going to be shattered. We're going to, every single one of us, I don't care how much communications I've had with the Blue Avians, and I'm still have a lens that I'm using to filter and interpret this information. All of us are going to be shocked. We're all going to have to rebuild our perspectives and belief systems. None of us are immune. How many people think that you're at the 50 percentile of being service to others? Yeah? To be service, I guess, the law of one stated that for people to ascend, they needed to be at least 51% service to others. Well, I found out what my percentage was, and it was very shocking. It was very low, much lower than I thought. We definitely need to re-examine what it is to be service to others and to examine our motivations for everything. We're not as close to 50% as we think we are. Very few of the population are. A lot of these people that have spent like 50, 60 years in monasteries, they're still lacking, and they've put in all the work. It's a very difficult thing to attain, especially immersed in the societies that we are. We are, from the moment we start going to school, our parents and society, they're training us to be a good slave. They're training us to not to think outside of the box, not to cause waves. So we walk lockstep, and we don't even realize how much we are. So what can we expect from this consciousness renaissance? From what Mika described, his people, they went through a process. They had help, people coming in and helping them expand their consciousness, just like we have. But it was covert help, it wasn't overt. They didn't have an invasion of good aliens that came and kicked out the bad aliens. Because what I described earlier, we are just as responsible as these negative beings are for the state we're in. We have to be the solution. We have to be a part of a solution. A lot of us have these different belief systems to where we're just kicking back, trying to be as good as we can, and waiting for somebody to come and save us. What they want us to know is you don't need religions, you don't need saviors. You are the one that you've been waiting for. We'll change the world one person at a time by doing this work, this inner work. This consciousness renaissance is going to occur when we do the work. As long as we're being forced into these little boxes of religion, and looking for someone to come and save us, we are not going to empower ourselves. That is one of the reasons that when different positive beings have brought us religions, they have brought us theologies, and the minute they give it to us and leave, it becomes corrupt. Well, we corrupt it, but mainly these Orion groups are corrupting these different theologies and belief systems to turn them into control systems. So this expansion in consciousness is going to pull us away from religion. Religion is a tool, and it's been a misused tool for too long. When we understand the power of co-creative consciousness, and we get a real understanding of what it is to be one. I would talk to, in the beginning, out of ignorance, I would ask Aree, can you tell me about my previous lives? You know, all of us wants to know, were we Cleopatra? Were we Edgar Cayce or whatever? And I had this conversation with David, and his eyes got really big. You know, I said, we get caught up in these incarnations that we used to be. And Aree looked at me and said, we're all one or we're not all one. We were all Cleopatra. We were all Edgar Cayce. We were all you. We were all me. We are one. Understanding that concept, people slightly understand it. They partially understand it. But till we get the full concept of we are one, you know, ego, us, you know, each of us, who we are, who we perceive ourselves are, that ego is a distortion. Once we get past these distortions of these experiences we've had that accumulate to make us who we see ourselves as, and we begin to see all of ourselves as an other self, instead of this group, these Republicans or these Democrats or these whatever, you know, we need to start teaching ourselves to think of them as our other self. That is going to end the separation and the division. So Ambassador Mika was introduced to me fairly recently since I started having these experiences. His people are in one of the closest stars to us, and they are literally our cosmic cousins. Genetically, if one of them were to get into some sort of an accident and we did a postmortem on them and checked their DNA, we would look and we'd be like, wow, they're 97, 98% the same as us genetically. They're almost identical to us genetically. There's very little difference. They are waiting for the opportunity to help their cosmic cousins. They are going to come and give us, we're going to see these people quite a bit after this transition. They're going to help guide us through it. And one of the things that I explained recently is that these genetic programs, what these beings do is they get you to a point to where you develop genetically and spiritually to a point to where we self-manage. Most of these non-terrestrial groups, they begin to manipulate their own DNA. They don't have ET groups coming in, abducting them, changing their DNA through viruses and all these different ways. They begin to manipulate their own DNA in concert with where they are spiritually. We are being developed in that same way. At some point, all of these genetic farmer races that have come in and manipulated us, we're going to be one of them. We're going to be one of these genetic farmer races. We're going to not only be managing our own DNA and spiritual vibration, we're going to be joining these councils and assisting them. We're going to have a planet to where people are talking about, last night this really weird being came into the room. It didn't have scales. It didn't have yellow eyes like us. It had blue eyes and yellow hair or brown hair, and its skin looked very weird. It was kind of pink. And they'll draw a picture, and on their television show, they'll be talking about these aliens that are abducting them, and it's going to be us. That's where we're heading in this transition. Now, Mika stated that their problems were very similar to ours. They don't have the genetic diversity that we do on our planet, so they don't have as much of the racism and that type of thing, but a lot of religious factions were at war with each other on his planet. His planet is in one of the closest stars to us, and it's a planet that's almost completely made of islands. There are no huge continents. It's all islands. So a lot of them, they were separated by the islands, and the genetic farmer groups were manipulating their genetics and spirituality, and the Orion group was coming in and causing them to be at odds with each other spiritually. When they were able to, with the help of others, finally shake off the rule of the Orion group, they began to go through this renaissance before their solar flash. The solar flash destroyed any of the artificial intelligence signal that was in their solar system, and that was the point where they really started growing like gangbusters. We haven't been talking about it as much recently, but the artificial intelligence signal that's being broadcast through many, many different galaxies is a major problem. It's our most significant problem.
Would you call that the Archon?
There are a lot of names for it. David seems to think that maybe that's the Luciferian energy, or the opposition energy. And they don't know how this AI influence came about. All they know is that it came from another reality so far back in time that none of these advanced races know where it came from. Entire galaxies have fallen to AI. There are entire galaxies that are they're just androids and machines. That's it. They had people on those different planets had developed technologies and developed artificial intelligence, and then the artificial intelligence then got to a point where it saw the creators as a virus, and saw and considered their star system out of balance, and it was out of balance because of this virus, these organic viruses that created the infrastructure for the AI to operate on. It's a very significant issue. As I stated, Mika's people are going to be some of the people that we have interactions with in the beginning. They're going to be supposedly this Nordic group and a couple other very human-looking groups that, to reduce the shock on our civilization, are going to be working with us. And there are a lot of very positive beings. There are positive reptilian beings out there. There are positive different types of grays. But because of the millions of years that our solar system has been under the influence of the Orion group, we're going to have a very visceral reaction to beings that don't look like us. So for our own comfort level, the beings that are more genetically compatible with us are going to begin to interact with us and help us not only adjust to the energies, but to understand the consciousness aspect, because we're going to be confused. And they're going to come in and say, okay, there's been a change. You see things differently. You think differently. You know each other's thoughts. You know each other's. There are no lies that can be had between you. This is how you acclimate to it. And they're going to take us by the hand as a loving cosmic family member, and they're going to assist us. They're not going to do the work for us. So, we have a part to play. We can't sit back and wait for an announcement. We can't sit back and wait for a positive ET group to come in. They're sitting back waiting for us, to be honest. They're waiting for us to activate. There's so many starseeds, or whatever you want to call them here right now, that are being activated that, it is crazy. I've never seen a point to where so many people they want to make a difference. there's a big difference from when I first came out, you know. People were, you know, locked in their little belief systems and were, you know, talking about disclosure on a certain level, didn't understand what full disclosure entailed. But the more that we are, the more that we're starting to come together. And that is the reason why these different Rothschild and Rockefeller groups recently tried to cause a civil war between all of us. You know, we're coming together too much for their taste. You know, and they know that this community has a better understanding of the co-creative consciousness than all of the sleeping masses. They cannot allow us to come together and begin to focus and co-create this new future. Because we are the magic. We are the magic that they use against us. And as soon as we realize that, and many of us are, we're taking control of that magic, and then we're creating a new reality. They're going to do everything in their power to prevent that. There are going to be a lot more incidents in this community of division, people coming in, spreading disinfo, all kinds of things. So what we need to do is stop focusing on our belief systems. You know, you believe, you know, this and that about this alien group, or we got to get past all of that, just like we do this Republican-Democrat thing. But what we have to do, which is very difficult through our programming, is we have to come up with a common goal and say, okay, you know, you believe this, I can't buy it, I don't believe that at all. But we got to put aside these different belief systems, not allow them to even be a part of the conversation, and approach this as if, you know, none of us know, but our common goal is we want to know, we want disclosure. That is the bind that will bring us together and allow us to co-create the disclosure we want. Until we start being active, coming together and, you know, forming, you know, different groups to, you know, it just depends. Some people will want to do the meditation thing, which is very important, the mass meditation. But what's equally important is action. We've got to come together, organize, and begin to demand disclosure. And, you know, the best way to do that is not to go out and, you know, talk about little green men. The best way to get this out to the rest of the mass consciousness is to talk about the technologies, the suppressed technologies. You know, when people find out that there's been cures for cancer for 70 years, they're going to be pissed, you know. I recently had to watch my aunt pass away from liver cancer, very horrible, when I knew that there was a cure. They've got technology, you know, every living thing has a bioneural frequency, and they can nullify that frequency. They can go in and detect, okay, here's the frequency of this cancer. And then they apply a field to it that turns it off, just turns it off. It's that easy. But we need to focus on spreading that information, the programming of society to have a giggle reaction, a giggle factor reaction when you hear about aliens. That's too programmed in. We cannot approach people, don't go to people talking about blue avians. Don't go to people talking about the Pleiadians or any of that, because the people are already programmed to just close off to it. But if you start talking about the technologies, that's something a lot of them can buy, that they can and invest themselves in. Now, mass and individual meditation is very important. That is how we begin to manage our co-creative power. That's how we begin to understand it. So we also need to come together not only to do protests, but we need to come together to do more and more, larger and larger mass meditations. Those mass meditations have a significant effect on the rest of the planet. So the optimal temporal reality, that is basically the ascension that all of us probably have somewhere in our belief systems, no matter what we think of as ascension. Many of us have different ideas on what ascension are. Like, you know, I said David and our conversations, He had a completely different idea of ascension than what I had been explained. You know, it was a consciousness thing more than anything. So the more we come together for action, the more we come together for mass meditations, the more likely we are going to attain this optimal temporal reality. We have to co-create it together. It's not going to be given to us. And I've already explained how our co-creative consciousness has been used against us. We are the source of the black magic. You know, we are the energy that is used. So many of us feel disempowered. You know, the things that have happened to us, the things that we've done to others. You know, we feel unworthy. Many of us don't feel like we have a voice. We don't feel like we have any power. But that's all a manipulation. There's not one person on this planet that's more important than the other. We all have the exact same contribution to make because we are one. How could any one of us be more important than the other? Each experience is just as important to the creator. All of them are just as important. We need to overcome that type of programming, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult. So what are some ways that people can get involved? We've developed secretspaceprogram.com. It's kind of a portal that you'll go to that allows you to connect with people in your local area. It's like a meetup group to where you can find out, you know, like until recently, I lived in Plano, Texas. And Stacy and I, we felt very alone. I mean, we felt like there was no one like us around. Well, there are people around, and they feel just as alone and separated. These different technologies, you know, like these meetup groups, are a good way to begin to bring us together. We've got a website going that's under development, and a lot of people are already starting to use it to have meetup groups. And there was one meetup group in Colorado Springs. Mike recently, he did a Law of One talk at the Eclipse of Disclosure. He used this tool to organize people and go and do kind of like a protest at the local Air Force base. I was being told by an Air Force contact, Sigmund, that he would appreciate it if I would tell my people to quit harassing his people. And I denied it. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he looked at me like, you know, whatever. Well, later on, I found out that Mike had, he was very quiet. You would never expect him to be so gutsy. But him and a bunch of very quiet people got together and found their voice. And they began handing out information about the secret space program to Air Force personnel as they were going onto the base. And it caused a hell of a stir. You know, all these people were now asking, do we have a secret space program? You know, and oh yeah, it caused a big headache. But you know what? Sorry, Sigmund, we want to cause more headaches. We need to get a lot of these very laid-back, quiet people together and find their voices like this small group did. This small group made a pretty big impact, a very big impact. It was only like 5 people, I think. Just imagine what we can do in our communities if we start doing things like that. Even putting information about a secret space program on a magnet sign and sticking it on the side of your car and driving around town. You know, people are sitting in traffic and then look over and like, what? And they'll look on their phones, you know, and start finding out information. There are a lot of ways. Roger started the Full Disclosure Project, and a lot of the people that I talked to, they're like, well, I don't quite believe how you do, so I don't know if I can work towards the same goal. You know, it's just, if I do, people are going to say, oh, I'm agreeing with this guy that talks to 8-foot-tall blue birds, and that's just too weird, you know. Forget that. We don't have to fight under the same flag. We can all carry our own individual flags. You know, we have groups come together, Full Disclosure Project. A lot of these different projects that are like cells. And these cells are coming together and developing a plan on how to force the powers that be or hopefully that won't be for long, to reveal the information about these technologies. So fulldisclosureproject.org, if you want to contribute your skills or ideas, we are all ears. We're ready. And the more of us that we can come together, the better. We have people come in all the time that have different perspectives that we never would have had on our own. And then we have, Full Disclosure Now. That's another group that came together. And of course, Cosmic Disclosure and the various whistleblower information that's coming out is very helpful. But again, you need to approach my information and everyone else's information with heavy discernment, because, like I said, all of us have these lenses, distorted lenses, and we're receiving information through those lenses, but we're also projecting it through those lenses. So information that comes from anyone is going to be distorted in some way. And it's good to be aware of that about yourself, that, we see information coming from other people is possibly distorted, but information that's coming from our own mouth, we see that as being more reliable. We need to understand that we're pretty much all in the same boat, So approaching myself, all these other whistleblowers with discernment is extremely important.